Story 1 of 54. Australia's Easter weather and potential severe tropical cyclone in Coral Sea. Australia's Easter weather and potential severe tropical cyclone in Coral Sea. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A high-pressure system will dominate Australia's weather from Good Friday to Easter Monday, bringing generally settled conditions across most of the country. Sydney is forecast to experience showers from Good Friday through Easter Sunday, with a 5 to 20 mm total rainfall likely, ABC, 5 to 20 mm, Guardian, showers most days except Monday. A tropical low named 37U is expected to form in the Coral Sea by Sunday and has a high chance of becoming a severe tropical cyclone by mid-next week, ABC, 37U, Guardian, 37U. The cyclone could track toward the Queensland coast, with potential landfall between Rockhampton and Cape York Peninsula, ABC, Rockhampton to Cape York, Guardian, Australian coast mid-next week. Darwin will see isolated showers and storms each day with 50 to 70% chance of precipitation and highs of 32 to 34 degrees Celsius, ABC, 50 to 70% chance, Guardian, isolated storms. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states Brisbane's highs will be 28 to 29 degrees Celsius with 50 to 60% chance of rain, while The Guardian says Brisbane will reach the high 20s, no specific percent given. ABC reports Perth's highs will drop to 23 to 25 degrees Celsius Saturday through Monday, but The Guardian states mid to high 20s, no exact range. ABC mentions a 30% chance of precipitation in Perth on Saturday through Sunday, while The Guardian does not specify a percentage for Perth's showers. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 2 of 54. Northern Territory custody deaths and fatal stabbing in Katherine. Northern Territory custody deaths and fatal stabbing in Katherine. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A 19-year-old man died from a serious stab wound in Katherine, NT, after being found in a car by police on Sunday evening, 6:45 p.m. The deceased was pronounced dead shortly after being taken to Katherine's temporary field hospital, established due to Cyclone Narelle preparations. An 18-year-old man with stab wounds was found in the same vehicle and airlifted to Darwin in a serious but stable condition. A 19-year-old driver was arrested and remains in custody for the incident. The incident is being investigated as a death in custody, marking the NT's third such death in less than a week. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the 25-year-old died in the back of a police vehicle, but ABC does not mention this specific case beyond the third death in custody. News Kamau refers to the field hospital as temporary in preparation for Cyclone Narelle, while ABC describes it as established in response to major flooding earlier in the month. News Kamau mentions the ABC report citing the 25-year-old's death in custody, but ABC does not explicitly attribute this detail to itself in the provided text. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 3 of 54. National Film and Sound Archives 2026 Sounds of Australia Collection Editions. National Film and Sound Archives 2026 Sounds of Australia Collection Editions. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Jack Colson's 1991 arrest speech. Gentlemen, this is democracy manifest. What is the charge? Eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal was added to the NFSA Sounds of Australia collection in 2026. The NFSA Sounds of Australia collection includes 9 audio recordings selected annually by a panel of experts from public nominations, with items over 10 years old. The collection was launched in 2007 and now contains over 200 recordings, with the full archive dating back to 1896. Joe Dolce's 1981 song Shut Up Your Face was added to the Sounds of Australia collection, peaking at number 1 in Australia for 8 weeks and in 11 other countries. The PB5 pedestrian crossing button sound was included in the collection, designed by Louis Chalice and sampled in Billie Eilish's 2019 song Bad Guy. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states the NFSA Sounds of Australia collection was launched in 2007 and now has over 200 recordings, while The Guardian says the collection now houses over 300,000 audio items total, not just the Sounds of Australia subset. The Guardian describes Coulson as a small-time criminal with aliases, but ABC does not mention his criminal history beyond the arrest context. ABC notes the NFSA Sounds of Australia collection is voted on by a panel of industry and NFSA sound experts, while The Guardian does not specify the exact composition of the panel beyond NFSA sound experts. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 4 of 54. Formula 1 Japanese Grand Prix 2026 pre-race analysis and qualifying recap. Formula 1 Japanese Grand Prix 2026 pre-race analysis and qualifying recap. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Mercedes locked out the front row for the third consecutive Grand Prix with Kimi Antonelli on pole and George Russell second at the Japanese Grand Prix 2026. Oscar Piastri qualified third fastest, the fastest non-Mercedes driver, after finishing fifth in the previous two Grands Prix, Australia and China. The Japanese Grand Prix 2025 was a one-stop race, and the previous two races in 2026, Australia and China, were also one-stop races, suggesting a one-stop strategy is likely today. Mercedes drivers Kimi Antonelli and George Russell both emphasized the importance of the start in their comments, with Antonelli stating he aims to lead into Turn 1. Charles Leclerc qualified fourth, starting on the second row behind the Mercedes duo, while Max Verstappen failed to qualify for Q3 and starts from 11th place. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC mentioned that the fastest non-Mercedes driver was Oscar Piastri, but The Guardian did not explicitly state this as a consensus fact, though it did confirm Piastri's third-place qualifying position. ABC emphasized that the track is challenging for overtaking and that Ferrari's Leclerc is fast off the line, while The Guardian did not provide additional context on overtaking challenges beyond the pole-sitter's historical success at Suzuka. ABC mentioned a technical issue with the broadcast feed during the drivers' parade, which was not mentioned in The Guardian's article. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 5 of 54. American journalist Shelly Kittleson kidnapped in Baghdad by Iranian-backed militia. American journalist Shelly Kittleson kidnapped in Baghdad by Iranian-backed militia. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Shelly Kittleson, a 49-year-old American freelance journalist based in Rome, was kidnapped in Baghdad on Tuesday. Kittleson had been reporting for Al Monitor and had extensive experience covering Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Iraqi authorities arrested one suspect with ties to the Iranian-backed militia group Kataib Hezbollah after a vehicle chase where the suspect's car overturned. The U.S. State Department confirmed Kittleson had been warned about threats prior to the abduction and advised her against traveling to Iraq. Kittleson was last seen near the Baghdad hotel, close to the Green Zone, and was bundled into a car by armed men. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC mention Kittleson was warned by the State Department, but Newscomall attributes the warning to the Trump administration sources, not explicitly the State Department. The Guardian and ABC report the suspect's arrest occurred after a car chase where the suspect's vehicle overturned, while Newscomall does not specify the vehicle's condition. The Guardian and ABC state the suspect was arrested after the kidnapper's vehicle was intercepted, but Newscomall does not mention the arrest of a suspect with ties to Kataib Hezbollah. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Story 6 of 54. Queensland Rail industrial action disrupts train services amid enterprise bargaining disputes. Queensland Rail industrial action disrupts train services amid enterprise bargaining disputes. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Queensland Rail confirmed no trains ran between Darra and Rosewood, Ipswich-Rosewood line, on April 1 due to industrial action. Queensland Rail confirmed no trains ran between Central and Cleveland, Cleveland line, on April 1 due to industrial action. Rail, Tram and Bus Union, RTBU, members walked off the job on April 1, 2025, triggering disruptions on the Ipswich-Rosewood and Cleveland lines. Queensland Rail estimated about 5,600 rail workers are covered by ongoing enterprise bargaining negotiations since January 2025. Queensland Rail said unions made over 500 claims, including additional leave entitlements, a shorter workweek, and higher superannuation contributions. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states Queensland Rail said members would not be paid if they did not perform full duties, while ABC says Queensland Rail denied telling workers not to attend work. News Kamau claims the union estimated about 200 train control staff participated in the strike, but ABC does not mention this specific number. News Kamau says the union accused the government of escalating the situation by turning a minor ban into a full stoppage, while ABC frames the government's response as heavy-handed but does not explicitly state this escalation claim. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 7 of 54. Australia's Reserve Bank bans debit credit card surcharges from October 2026. Australia's Reserve Bank bans debit credit card surcharges from October 2026. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The RBA will ban surcharges on debit, prepaid, and credit cards, EFTPOS, MasterCard, Visa, from October 1, 2026, saving consumers $1.6 billion annually in surcharge fees. Businesses will save $200 million annually in surcharge fees, with the RBA estimating total business savings of $910 million per year from lowered interchange fees. Interchange fee caps will be reduced, domestic-issued consumer credit cards from 0.8% to 0.3%, debit cards from 0.2% to 0.16%, and foreign-issued cards capped at 1%. Commercial credit cards retain a 0.8% cap. About 16% of Australian businesses currently surcharge card payments, with roughly one-third of hospitality businesses applying surcharges. The RBA will mandate transparency by requiring EFTPOS, MasterCard, and Visa to publish their merchant fees, helping businesses compare providers. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC and The Age both report the RBA's interchange fee cap for domestic-issued consumer credit cards will drop to 0.3%, but ABC notes the RBA also wants to standardize fees, while The Age emphasizes the impact on reward schemes without mentioning standardization. The Guardian states the reforms will likely lead to a one-off 0.1% price increase for consumers, while ABC and The Age do not explicitly quantify this but acknowledge potential price hikes. ABC and The Age both quote Brad Kelly criticizing the reforms, but ABC provides his detailed argument about small business margins, 3 to 3.5%, while The Age omits this specific margin figure. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, SBS News, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 8 of 54. Australian Matildas squad selection for FIFA Series in Kenya with key absences and World Cup preparations. Australian Matildas squad selection for FIFA Series in Kenya with key absences and World Cup preparations. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Sam Kerr is named captain of the 22-player Matildas squad for the FIFA Series in Kenya. The Matildas will play Malawi, ranked 153, on April 11 in Nairobi, followed by either Kenya, 134, or India, 67, on April 15. Mary Fowler, Ellie Carpenter, Kyra Cooneycross, and Katrina Gorey are notable absences from the squad. Claire Hunt will miss the tournament due to surgery on her right knee after an Asian Cup injury. The squad includes Letitia McKenna, debut, Jessica Nash, and Isabel Gomez, returning to international duty. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC lists Emily Van Egmond and Remy Simpson in the squad, but The Guardian does not include them. ABC mentions the Matildas will face either Kenya or India, with Kenya listed first in phrasing, while The Guardian's article does not specify an order for the second match. ABC specifies Claire Hunt's surgery was due to an injury during the Asian Cup, while The Guardian does not provide this detail. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 9 of 54. Tiger Woods Florida DUI arrest and crash after alleged phone use and opioid possession. Tiger Woods Florida DUI arrest and crash after alleged phone use and opioid possession. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tiger Woods was arrested on the 27th of March, 2024 in Martin County, Florida, for suspicion of driving under the influence, DUI, after a rollover crash near Jupiter Island. Woods told authorities he was looking down at his phone and changing the radio station before the crash, which occurred on a residential road on Jupiter Island. Woods's Land Rover clipped a truck and rolled onto its side, causing approximately $5,000 to $7,254 in damage to the trailer truck, Guardian, $5,000, ABC, $7,254. Deputies found 2 white pills in Woods's pocket identified as hydrocodone, Norco, a prescription opioid, during the arrest. Woods admitted to taking a few prescription medications earlier in the day, including Vicodin and medications for blood pressure and cholesterol, Guardian, or a few medications, ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian reports $5,000 in damage to the trailer, while ABC reports $7,254 in damage to the truck. The Guardian states Woods was held for 8 hours under Florida law before posting bail, but ABC does not specify this detail. The Guardian mentions Woods was taken to a hospital for medical clearance before jail, while ABC does not mention this. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 10 of 54. NSW government crackdown on fuel price exploitation amid global supply crisis. NSW government crackdown on fuel price exploitation amid global supply crisis. Here's what every outlet agrees on. NSW Fair Trading issued 24 fines in the past 7 days for mismatches between Bowser prices and fuel check listings. NSW Fuel Check saw daily visits surge from 8,000 to 10,000 in January to 500,000 by late March, peaking at 20,000 plus visits hour in April. Federal government halved fuel excise in response to the Iran conflict, cutting prices by 26.3 cents per litre, later supplemented by a 5.7 c-litre reduction from GST windfalls. NSW government imposed on-the-spot fines of $1,100 for fuel price violations, with potential court penalties of up to $22,000 for individuals and $110,000 for corporations. Nearly 75% of petrol stations in NSW were inspected in April, with 93 infringement notices issued. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau states 24 fines were issued based on intelligence and suspected price exploitation, while ABC clarifies 24 fines were supported by consumer reports. Newscomau mentions 93 infringement notices issued in April, but ABC does not specify the month for the 93 notices, only states they were issued during the Blitz. Newscomau reports 20,000 visits hour to Fuel Check in April, while ABC states 500,000 daily visits by late March, no hourly figure provided. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 11 of 54. NRL legend Nathan Merritt's cancer diagnosis and South Sydney's Legacy Bell appearance. NRL legend Nathan Merritt's cancer diagnosis and South Sydney's Legacy Bell appearance. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nathan Merritt has stage 4 cancer affecting his liver and esophagus. Merritt has been given approximately 12 months to live by doctors. Merritt will ring the Legacy Bell before the Rabbitohs vs Bulldogs game on Good Friday at Accor Stadium. Merritt scored 146 tries for the Rabbitohs, Newscomau, and 154 career tries including 135 for Souths, SMH. Campbell Graham returns from a shoulder injury to play for the Rabbitohs on Good Friday. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau states Merritt scored 146 tries for the Rabbitohs, while SMH states he scored 154 career tries including 135 for Souths, no direct contradiction but differing totals. Newscomau does not mention Merritt's dying wish for Souths to win the premiership, which is explicitly stated in SMH. SMH mentions Merritt was placed in an induced coma in late 2023 due to double pneumonia, a detail not referenced in Newscomau. This story was covered by news.com.au and Sydney Morning Herald. Story 12 of 54. Review of JW Marriott Khao Lak Resort and Spa in Thailand by two sources. Review of JW Marriott Khao Lak Resort and Spa in Thailand by two sources. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The resort is named JW Marriott Khao Lak Resort and Spa. It has 424 rooms and villas, with a recent addition of 127 rooms and villas following a major redevelopment. The resort features 6 distinct accommodation wings connected by extensive waterways. Signature restaurants include Olive, Italian, Takrai, Thai, Sakura, Japanese, and Drift, Mediterranean and Middle Eastern. Deluxe rooms start at $253 per night. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 13 of 54. St Kilda AFL player Lance Collard faces tribunal for alleged homophobic slur during VFL match. St Kilda AFL player Lance Collard faces tribunal for alleged homophobic slur during VFL match. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Lance Collard, 21, is facing a disciplinary tribunal for an alleged homophobic slur during a VFL match against Frankston on, date not specified, but last week. Collard was initially banned for 3 weeks for a brawl in the same match, later reduced to 2 weeks after pleading guilty to a high hit on an opponent. This incident follows a 6-game ban Collard received in 2024 for using a homophobic slur while playing for VFL side Sandringham, affiliated with Street Kilda. The AFL has referred a charge under AFL Rule 2.3a, Conduct Unbecoming, to the tribunal for Collard's alleged slur. The tribunal hearing is scheduled for next week, with details to be announced later. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau does not mention Collard's denial to investigators, while ABC reports Collard told investigators he did not use the slur. Newscomau does not reference the broader AFL crackdown on homophobic slurs or Isaac Rankine's ban, which ABC highlights. ABC describes the incident as part of a heated exchange with no further detail, while Newscomau frames it as a swinging arm brawl with a homophobic slur. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 14 of 54. Australia's fuel crisis response amid Middle East conflict and price spikes. Australia's fuel crisis response amid Middle East conflict and price spikes. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Albanese delivered a rare national address to the nation on April 3, 2024, at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, addressing the fuel crisis caused by the Middle East conflict. The federal government halved the fuel excise on petrol and diesel by 26.3 cents per litre for 3 months, effective April 1, 2024, reducing the tax from 52.6 cents to 26.3 cents per litre. The heavy vehicle road user charge was reduced to zero for 3 months, costing the government approximately $2.55 billion, depending on demand levels. Australia is currently at Level 2 of a 4-stage National Fuel Security Plan, with the plan including stages: Plan and Prepare, keeping Australia moving, taking targeted action, and protecting critical services for all Australians. The average price of unleaded petrol in Australia's capital cities was around $2.53 per litre as of early April, up from approximately $2.09 when the Middle East conflict began on February 28, 2024. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC report that the excise cut will take 1 to 2 weeks to fully flow through, but ABC later reports that prices began dropping immediately in some areas, contradicting the initial expectation. The Guardian mentions that the Australian government is considering fuel price caps and a windfall tax, but the ABC and other sources do not mention these specific measures being actively considered or announced. The Guardian and ABC report that the government is encouraging Australians to use public transport to save fuel, But The Guardian also notes that the government is not explicitly mandating this, only suggesting it as a voluntary measure. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, SBS News, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 15 of 54. US-Israel war with Iran escalation and Trump's threats against Iran's energy infrastructure. US-Israel war with Iran escalation and Trump's threats against Iran's energy infrastructure. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Donald Trump threatened to obliterate Iran's electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island if a ceasefire deal is not reached by April 6, per Guardian and ABC. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei stated US peace proposals were excessive, unrealistic and irrational, Guardian, and unrealistic, illogical and excessive, ABC, following talks among Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey's foreign ministers on April 5. Iran has not engaged in direct negotiations with the US, only through intermediaries, Guardian, ABC. Israel and the US launched strikes on Iran, including targets in Tehran and infrastructure linked to Hezbollah in Beirut, ABC, Guardian. Oil prices are on track for a record monthly rise, with Brent crude up 54% since March 1, per Guardian. But not all outlets told the same story. Guardian states Trump's April 6 deadline was extended from an unspecified prior date, but ABC and Newscomall do not mention this extension. Guardian reports Iran's proposals were described as excessive, unrealistic and irrational, while ABC calls them unrealistic, illogical and excessive, minor wording difference but consistent in tone. Guardian notes Iran's parliamentary speaker Ghalibaf dismissed talks as cover for US troop deployments, but ABC does not mention this detail. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian and news.com.au. Story 16 of 54. Melbourne couple charged with slavery and abuse of Indonesian woman. Melbourne couple charged with slavery and abuse of Indonesian woman. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Chi Kit Max Chong and Angie Ye Ling Lau are facing trial in Victoria's County Court for slavery-related offences, both pleading not guilty. The alleged victim was a 61-year-old Indonesian woman who lived with the couple in their Point Cook, Melbourne home from February 2022 until she fled in October 2022. The woman was allegedly subjected to beatings, restrictions on food, sleep, and movement, forced to work as a domestic slave, and punished for perceived failures. Mr. Chong is charged with intentionally possessing a slave and 3 counts of common assault. Ms. Lau is charged with assisting or encouraging the slavery offence. The woman died in 2024, unrelated to the case, after presenting to St. Vincent's Hospital with injuries including a swollen ear, laceration to the foot, and malnutrition indicators. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomall states the woman was initially given a bedroom but later forced to sleep on the stairs or in the garage, while ABC does not specify the initial sleeping arrangements. Newscomall mentions the woman was allegedly told she could leave if she paid $1 million, but ABC does not include this detail. NEWSOMU's prosecutor Sean Ginsburg explicitly stated Chong heavily controlled her life, including her freedom of movement, welfare, sleep, food and medical care, while ABC's prosecutor Sean Ginsburg SC focuses more on threats and coercion without this exact phrasing. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 17 of 54. Australia's fuel supply crisis and government response amid Middle East conflict. Australia's fuel supply crisis and government response amid Middle East conflict. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia currently holds 30 days of diesel, 39 days of petrol, and 30 days of jet fuel in reserve, ABC Article 1, ABC Article 2. Fuel shipments to Australia are secured through May 2024, ABC Article 1, ABC Article 2. The federal government has passed legislation to underwrite future fuel shipments, covering price differences if importers sell fuel at a loss, ABC Article 1, ABC Article 2. The government has cut the fuel excise by 26.3 cents per litre, ABC Article 1, ABC Article 2. The The national average price of diesel is $3.23 per litre and unleaded petrol is $2.58 per litre, ABC Article 1. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the government has not publicly nominated a clear trigger point for fuel rationing, while Article 2 states the government has not publicly indicated a threshold for restricting petrol consumption but does not explicitly deny a trigger point exists. Article 1 reports that the government's preliminary modelling assumed voluntary measures would kick in at 15 days of supply, while Article 2 does not explicitly mention this detail but focuses on the 10-day rationing threshold. Article 1 reports that the government's modelling assumed rationing would kick in at 10 days of supply, while Article 2 also reports this but does not provide additional context on the voluntary measures at 15 days. This story was covered by ABC News. Story 18 of 54. Melbourne Storm forward Tui Kamikamica hospitalised after suspected stroke. Melbourne Storm forward Tui Kamikamica hospitalised after suspected stroke. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tui Kamikamica suffered a suspected stroke on Monday morning during a medical episode. Kamikamica was discharged from Royal Melbourne Hospital to commence inpatient rehabilitation, Article 1, and is currently in hospital receiving treatment, Articles 2 and 3. Kamikamica played 25 minutes for Melbourne Storm in their 28-24 loss to North Queensland Cowboys in Townsville on Saturday, Articles 1 and 2. Kamikamica has made 142 appearances for Melbourne Storm since his NRL debut in 2017. Kamikamica captains Fiji at the international level and was part of the Storm's grand final side last year. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Kamikamica has been discharged from hospital to commence inpatient rehabilitation, while Articles 2 and 3 state he is still in hospital receiving treatment. Article 1 mentions Kamikamica played in the Storm's loss to North Queensland Cowboys in Townsville, while Article 2 states he played in the loss to the Cowboys, no mention of Townsville. Article 2 refers to the Storm's next match as Round 5, while Article 1 does not specify the round number for the Panthers match. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 19 of 54. US President Trump's criticism of NATO allies over Iran conflict and Australia's response under Albanese. US President Trump's criticism of NATO allies over Iran conflict and Australia's response under Albanese. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Donald Trump threatened to withdraw the US from NATO after allies refused to support his military actions against Iran. Trump accused Australia of failing to offer military support during the standoff in the Strait of Hormuz. Keir Starmer, UK PM, publicly opposed the US-Israeli war on Iran, calling it illegal, but provided some military access to the US. Anthony Albanese, Australian PM, avoided direct criticism of Trump's war conduct in a national address. The US and Israel launched military strikes targeting Iran in the past month, escalating tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 claims Trump is absolutely considering withdrawing the US from NATO, while Article 2 does not explicitly state this but focuses on Trump's threats to never forget allies' actions. Article 1 suggests Trump may invade Iran with troops or Cuba as a distraction, while Article 2 does not mention potential invasions and instead emphasizes Trump's lack of a viable exit strategy. Article 1 describes Trump's criticism of Australia as petulant, quoting Andrew Hastie, but Article 2 does not reference this quote directly. This story was covered by The Guardian. Story 20 of 54. Fair Work Commission abolishes junior pay rates for 18 to 20-year-olds in Australia. Fair Work Commission abolishes junior pay rates for 18 to 20-year-olds in Australia. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Fair Work Commission abolished junior pay rates for workers aged 18 and over in retail, fast food, and pharmacy sectors. Around 500,000 young Australians will benefit from the wage increase, phased in over 4 years. Under previous awards, 18-year-olds were paid 70% of the adult rate, 19-year-olds 80%, and 20-year-olds 90%. The changes apply to the General Retail Industry Award, Fast Food Industry Award, and Pharmacy Industry Award. The first wage adjustments are scheduled to begin in December 2023. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian mentions employer groups arguing that overhauling junior pay rates would deter hiring, but ABC does not explicitly contradict this, only highlights employer concerns without further detail. No contradictions found regarding specific numbers, dates, or key factual claims between sources. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and SBS News. Story 21 of 54. AFL player Tristan Xerri suspended for blood-wiping incident against Essendon captain Andrew McGrath. AFL player Tristan Xerri suspended for blood-wiping incident against Essendon captain Andrew McGrath. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tristan Xerri was sent directly to the AFL tribunal for serious misconduct after allegedly wiping blood from his nose onto Essendon captain Andrew McGrath's face during a match on the 17th of May, 2025 at Docklands Stadium. Xerri pleaded guilty to the charge and was suspended for 3 games by the tribunal on the 19th of May, 2025, missing matches against Carlton, Brisbane, and Richmond. The incident occurred after Xerri complained to an umpire about a blooded nose, kicked a goal, and then physically clashed with McGrath before wiping his hand on McGrath's face. North Melbourne won the match against Essendon by 12 points, 12.10, 72, to 10.10, 70, on the 17th of May, 2025. Tribunal Chairman Jeff Gleeson KC described Xerri's actions as disgraceful behaviour and noted Xerri's hand was close to McGrath's open mouth. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC both report Xerri was sledged with homophobic slurs before the incident, but The Age does not mention this detail. The Guardian states the tribunal hearing was held a day earlier than normal, Monday, while The Age and ABC do not specify the exact timing beyond it being on Monday or Tuesday. The Guardian and ABC emphasize Xerri's remorse and apology to McGrath, but The Age does not include a quote from McGrath about how he responded to the apology. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and The Age. Story 22 of 54. Westpac CEO warns of Australian recession risks amid inflation and geopolitical tensions. Westpac CEO warns of Australian recession risks amid inflation and geopolitical tensions. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Miller, CEO of Westpac, warned in interviews with ABC's That's Business podcast that there is a chance of a recession for Australia due to inflationary pressures and geopolitical tensions, specifically citing Middle East conflicts. Australia's inflation rose 3.7% in February 2026, down 0.1% from January, but remains above the Reserve Bank of Australia's, RBA, target band of 2 to 3%. The RBA has raised interest rates twice in 2026, most recently to 4.1% from 3.85% in March 2026, with Westpac's chief economist Lucy Ellis forecasting 3 more hikes by August 2026. The median house price in Australia is $933,137, significantly above the $600,000 to $650,000 range affordable on a median income of $90,000 to $95,000. Australians lost $2.18 billion to scams in 2025, with investment scams accounting for $837.7 million and payment redirection scams for $166.8 million, per the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, ACCC. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports Westpac's chief economist Lucy Ellis forecasts 3 more rate hikes by August 2026, while Newskamau does not explicitly state this forecast but focuses on market expectations of further tightening without a specific number. ABC cites Miller stating a single additional rate hike would return the cash rate to 4.35%, but Newskamau does not mention this specific rate target. ABC attributes the February inflation figure of 3.7% to a 0.1% drop from January, while Newskamau does not reference the month-over-month change in detail. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 23 of 54. Australia's fuel supply crisis and agricultural cost pressures amid rising fuel prices and Middle East conflict. Australia's fuel supply crisis and agricultural cost pressures amid rising fuel prices and Middle East conflict. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia's fuel reserves as of recent reports are 39 days of petrol, 29 days of diesel, and 30 days of jet fuel left in reserve, ABC, Guardian, news.com.au. In New South Wales, 150 service stations were without diesel, ABC, Guardian, down from 182, ABC, or 184, news.com.au, in prior days. Energy Minister Chris Bowen reported 312 service stations across Australia were without diesel out of around 8,000 total stations, Guardian, ABC. More than 50 ships are en route to Australia to replenish fuel supplies, Guardian, news.com.au. The federal government has halved the fuel excise tax, contributing to a reduction in petrol prices to around $2.20 per litre in most capital cities, Guardian, news.com.au. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports 36 stations in NSW were completely out of fuel, down from 48, while news.com.au states 48 stations were entirely out of stock, down from 184. ABC claims 182 NSW stations were out of diesel on Thursday, but news.com.au says 184 were out of fuel, not specifying diesel. The Guardian reports 32 fewer NSW stations were out of diesel on Saturday morning compared to Friday, while ABC does not provide a direct comparison for the same time frame. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Story 24 of 54. Australian political polling shows Labor's declining support amid fuel crisis and Middle East war. Australian political polling shows Labor's declining support amid fuel crisis and Middle East war. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Albanese's Labor government primary vote dropped to 31% in Newspoll, down from 36% in November 2023 and 34.6% at the May 2023 election. One Nation's primary vote is at 26% in Newspoll and 29% in Redbridge poll. Both sources report recent figures. The Coalition's primary vote is at 21% in Newspoll and 17% in Redbridge poll, record low. 72% of voters disapprove of US military action against Iran, reported by both sources. Anthony Albanese announced Australia will underwrite the purchase of additional fuel cargoes to address shortages. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 reports One Nation's primary vote at 26%, slightly down from previous, while Article 2 reports it at 29%, up from previous. Article 1 states Labor's primary vote is 31%, down from 36%, while Article 2 states Labor's primary vote remains unchanged at 32% in Redbridge poll. Article 1 reports the Coalition's primary vote at 21%, but Article 2 reports it at a record low of 17% in Redbridge poll. This story was covered by news.com.au. Story 25 of 54. Man charged with murdering sex worker in Melbourne brothel. Man charged with murdering sex worker in Melbourne brothel. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Michael James Chalmers, 36, is accused of murdering Leah Jong, known as Yuko, at the Rainbow Garden brothel on Cowper Street, Footscray, in November 2024. Leah Jong, 62, was found dead at the brothel on November 29, 2024, after allegedly being attacked on November 27. Chalmers was captured on security cameras allegedly grabbing Jong in a headlock, forcing her onto a bed, and leaving her motionless for 31 minutes before departing. Chalmers pleaded not guilty to murder and was remanded in custody. His next hearing is scheduled for April 16, 2025. Magistrate Vincenzo Caltabiano committed Chalmers to stand trial for murder but dismissed charges of rape and constructive murder due to insufficient evidence. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports Chalmers was with Jong in a bedroom for 31 minutes, but News Kamau states the violent act occurred after about 2 minutes of conversation. ABC describes Jong's injuries as blunt force trauma injuries that were allegedly caused by rape, while Newskamau notes the medical examiner only said injuries occurred in the hours or days before her death and could not definitively link them to Chalmers. ABC includes a direct quote from a sex worker advocate, Damien, about Jong's character and community impact, which is not present in Newskamau. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 26 of 54. Australian PM Albanese's housing tax reforms and energy crisis response amid Iran war tensions. Australian PM Albanese's housing tax reforms and energy crisis response amid Iran war tensions. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese plans to wind back the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing to address housing affordability. Labour aims to build 1.2 million homes but is on track to miss this target. Albanese's government is rebuilding Australia's fuel stocks, which are below global standards, over 90% depleted. Opposition leader Angus Taylor criticised Albanese's televised address, calling it lacking in answers and leadership. Albanese adopted the coalition's policy to cut the fuel excise days prior to his speech. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 27 of 54. Australia's fuel supply crisis amid Middle East conflict and global shipping disruptions. Australia's fuel supply crisis amid Middle East conflict and global shipping disruptions. Here's what every outlet agrees on. 53 to 55 ships carrying fuel are en route to Australia, arriving this month, ABC, 53, SMH Thege, 55. 3.7 billion litres of fuel are on board these ships, ABC. Australia's monthly fuel consumption is roughly 4.5 billion litres, ABC. 410 service stations are out of diesel and 145 to 193 are out of unleaded petrol, ABC, 410-145, SMH Thege, 410-193. The federal government halved the fuel excise by 26.3 cents per litre, ABC, with premiers agreeing to an additional 5.7 cents per litre cut until June 30th. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports 145 stations out of unleaded petrol, while SMH Thege report 193 stations out of petrol. ABC states 48 NSW stations are out of stock altogether, while SMH Thege do not specify regional shortages beyond national totals. ABC highlights industry skepticism, e.g., DI losses cancellations, while SMH Thege focus only on government diversification successes. This story was covered by ABC News, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 28 of 54. Impact of RBA surcharge ban on Qantas points earnings and alternatives for frequent flyers. Impact of RBA surcharge ban on Qantas points earnings and alternatives for frequent flyers. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Debit and credit surcharges were banned nationwide on October 1, 2023. Interchange fees for credit cards were slashed 63% from 0.8% to 0.3% as compensation for merchants. The Reserve Bank previously reduced interchange fees in 2017, leading to reduced points earn rates, some by up to a half, and capped sign-up bonuses. Qantas Health Insurance offers 140,000 Qantas points for new customers signing up by April 9, 2024. Everyday Rewards at Woolworths, Big W, and BWS converts points to Qantas at a 2-to-1 ratio. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 29 of 54. Romanian nationals charged in Queensland for targeting elderly shoppers in wallet theft scams. Romanian nationals charged in Queensland for targeting elderly shoppers in wallet theft scams. Here's what every outlet agrees on. 3 Romanian nationals, a 49-year-old man, a 29-year-old woman, and a 42-year-old man, were arrested in 8 Mile Plains on the 28th of March, 2024 for allegedly stealing from elderly victims at Queensland shopping centres. The trio allegedly targeted elderly people, aged 70 to 94, at ATMs or grocery payments in Kenmore, Chermside, Strathpine, North Lakes, Buddina, Caloundra, and Laidley shopping centres. The scam involved the suspects claiming to have dropped their wallet to distract victims, then stealing their cards and cash. Police seized approximately $20,000 from a unit complex in 8 Mile Plains during the arrests. The 49-year-old man and 29-year-old woman were charged with multiple counts of fraud and stealing, 5 and 8 counts respectively, and refused bail. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 30 of 54. Australian court hearing on extradition of ex-Pinochet agent Adriana Rivas for torture charges. Australian court hearing on extradition of ex-Pinochet agent Adriana Rivas for torture charges. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Adriana Rivas is a 72-year-old Australian resident accused of kidnapping and torture during Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship in Chile in the 1970s. She worked for the Pinochet regime's secret police, National Intelligence Directorate, from 1973 to 1977 before moving to Australia in 1978. Chile formally requested her extradition in 2014, and she has been in detention in Australia since 2019 awaiting removal. A 2-day federal court hearing in New South Wales began on Monday, June 2024, to consider her final appeal against extradition. Justice Michael Lee is presiding over the hearing, which follows years of legal battles since 2014. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports previously unreported emails reveal an Australian consular official may have helped Rivas flee Chile in 2011, while DFAT denies any record of such assistance. ABC cites Rivas' own emails describing embassy awareness of her bail breach and departure, but DFAT claims no official record exists confirming this. ABC states the Attorney General approved Rivas' extradition in 2024, but SBS does not specify this timeline beyond the 2019 detention start. This story was covered by ABC News and SBS News. Story 31 of 54. Former Home Affairs Secretary Michael Pezzolo's misconduct inquiry findings and public fallout. Former Home Affairs Secretary Michael Pezzolo's misconduct inquiry findings and public fallout. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Michael Pezzolo was sacked as Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs in November 2023 after a confidential report found he breached the government's code of conduct at least 14 times. The inquiry report by former Australian Public Service Commissioner Linnell Briggs described Pezzolo's conduct as ill-advised, reckless, and a step too far in terms of the boundaries of normal public service practice. Pezzolo engaged with Liberal power broker Scott Briggs over many years, seeking to influence ministerial appointments and machinery of government arrangements to his advantage. Pezzolo failed to declare a conflict of interest in the granting of a $79,500 government contract to Scott Briggs' company DPG Advisory in 2021. The inquiry report was obtained by former Independent Senator Rex Patrick after an 18-month to 2-year Freedom of Information battle. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between sources regarding core factual claims. This story was covered by The Guardian, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 32 of 54. Scientists create first 3D map of clitoral nerves after decades of neglect. Scientists create first 3D map of clitoral nerves after decades of neglect. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A 3D map of the clitoral nerves was created using high-energy X-rays on donated female pelvises by Ju Young Lee at Amsterdam University Medical Center. The clitoris was first anatomically dissected in 1546 by Charles Estienne, who called it the member honto, shameful member. Andreas Vesalius in the 16th century dismissed the clitoris as a new and useless part and claimed it didn't exist in healthy women. Renier de Groff in 1672 noted that every female body he dissected had a visible clitoris, criticizing other anatomists for ignoring it. The clitoris did not appear in standard anatomy textbooks until the 38th edition of Gray's Anatomy in 1995. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the clitoris was first anatomically dissected in 1546 by Charles Estienne, but does not mention the 1672 critique by Renier de Groff in detail. Article 2 claims the nerve branches continue strongly to the glans, while previous research had indicated the big dorsal nerve of the clitoris gradually diminishes as it approaches the glans. Article 1 references the 1486 Malleus Maleficarum witchcraft text, while Article 2 does not mention historical witchcraft associations with the clitoris. This story was covered by The Guardian. Story 33 of 54. Australian aid worker Zomi Frankcom's death in Israeli drone strike and ongoing investigation. Australian aid worker Zomi Frankcom's death in Israeli drone strike and ongoing investigation. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Zomi Frankcom, 43, an Australian aid worker for World Central Kitchen, was killed on April 1, 2024, along with 6 colleagues in an Israeli drone strike on a humanitarian convoy in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, conducted an internal investigation, dismissing 2 officers and reprimanding 3 others over the strike. Former Australian Defence Force Chief Mark Binskin's 2024 report found a significant breakdown in situational awareness and serious failures in IDF procedures, concluding the strike was not knowingly or deliberately directed against the convoy. Binskin's report noted IDF controls failed, leading to errors in decision-making and misidentification, likely compounded by confirmation bias. Israel's ambassador to Australia, Hillel Newman, stated the investigation into Frankcom's death is ongoing and has not been shelved or concluded. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC report the IDF dismissed 2 officers and reprimanded 3 over the strike, but The Guardian does not specify the number of officers reprimanded beyond 3 others. Ambassador Newman claims Binskin had unprecedented access to IDF intelligence, while Binskin's report explicitly states he was never given access to the drone footage audio. The Guardian and ABC highlight the family's demand for the drone audio release, but Newman explicitly states it is not in my hands and in the IDF's hands without commitment to release. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Story 34 of 54. Carlton AFL coach Michael Voss faces scrutiny over repeated late-game collapses in 2026 season. Carlton AFL coach Michael Voss faces scrutiny over repeated late-game collapses in 2026 season. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Michael Voss is Carlton's head coach and was retained by club president Graham Wright in August 2024 to complete his contract in 2026. Carlton lost to Melbourne on Sunday, 2026, after surrendering a 43-point lead at the MCG. Carlton lost to North Melbourne on Good Friday, 2026, after leading by 21 points in the final quarter, 14.12, 96, to 13.8, 86. Carlton has lost 9 times since half-time leads since the start of 2025, including a loss to Richmond in 2025 after leading at the main break. Voss stated there is no silver bullet to fix Carlton's second-half fade-outs, emphasizing repetition and consistency as solutions. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian claims Carlton's bulldozing football style is labor-intensive and difficult to maintain, while ABC and The Age do not explicitly critique the style as unsustainable. The Guardian suggests Carlton's decision to back Voss was data-driven and unswayed by public opinion, but ABC and The Age do not reference this data-driven rationale. The Guardian implies Voss's energy approach is a short-term fix, while ABC and The Age focus more on his composure and refusal to discuss his future publicly. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and The Age. Story 35 of 54. 20-year-old man accused of plotting WA terror attacks faces bail hearing. 20-year-old man accused of plotting WA terror attacks faces bail hearing. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Jason Joseph Michaels, 20, is accused of plotting a terrorist attack targeting Parliament House, police headquarters, and mosques in Perth, WA, following a raid on his parents' Bindoon home in February 2024. Police seized a written manifesto diary containing plans for mass casualty attacks, dozens of rounds of ammunition, 900+ guns, and knives during the raid at Bindoon, 75 kilometers northeast of Perth. Magistrate Belinda Coleman refused bail for Michaels, describing his diary as disturbing and not just ramblings but evidence of intent, and noting he was remanded in custody. Michaels allegedly referenced white supremacist ideology, consulted extremist manifestos, and researched targets like mosque entry points and lockpicking techniques. Michaels appeared via video link from Casuarina Prison's Special Handling Unit during the bail hearing on March 2024. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC mentions Michaels may require an assessment for autism spectrum disorder, but this detail is not referenced in Newscomer or The Guardian. The Guardian describes Michael's diary as containing a list of actions he planned to undertake, while Newscomer frames it as big grandiose ideas that were never going to happen, implying differing interpretations of intent. Newscomer states Michaels allegedly researched explosives via a 3D computer and bomb-making materials, but The Guardian does not specify this method, only mentioning a 3D printer for a gun. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Story 36 of 54. Federal judge dismisses most of Blake Lively's sexual harassment claims against Justin Baldoni in It Ends With Us case. Federal judge dismisses most of Blake Lively's sexual harassment claims against Justin Baldoni in It Ends With Us case. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Federal Judge Lewis Lyman dismissed 10 of Blake Lively's 13 claims against Justin Baldoni in a ruling on the 18th of April, 2024. The surviving claims are breach of contract, retaliation, and aiding and abetting in retaliation, with a trial scheduled for the 18th of May, 2024. Judge Lyman ruled Lively was an independent contractor, not an employee, and thus could not bring sexual harassment claims under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Lively alleged Baldoni kissed her forehead, rubbed his face against her neck, and made comments like "it smells good" during filming of It Ends With Us. Judge Lyman noted Baldoni was acting in the scene and that the conduct was part of a slow dancing scene between characters, not directed at Lively personally. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian reports Lively's text to Swift included asking for script rewrite feedback, while ABC does not mention this detail. The Guardian states Baldoni's lawyer described the defendants as very good people in a statement to AP, but ABC does not reference this exact phrasing. The Guardian notes Lively's claims of Baldoni's kissing, nuzzling, and touching without consent, while ABC focuses more on Baldoni's acting in the scene defense. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 37 of 54. Global coalition meeting to reopen Strait of Hormuz amid Iran blockade and geopolitical tensions. Global coalition meeting to reopen Strait of Hormuz amid Iran blockade and geopolitical tensions. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A virtual meeting of 35 to 40 countries, including Australia, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Japan, Canada, South Korea, New Zealand, UAE, Nigeria, convened on the 29th of March, 2024 to discuss reopening the Strait of Hormuz, excluding the US. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong and Defence Minister Richard Marles attended the meeting, with Wong representing Australia virtually. The UK, led by Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper, coordinated the meeting, with a follow-up military planning session scheduled for the 2nd of April, 2024. Iran has effectively blocked the Strait of Hormuz since US-Israel strikes on the 28th of February, 2024, stranding -1,000 or 2,000 ships and -20,000 seafarers, reducing daily vessel traffic from tilde 150 to tilde 25-130. The Strait of Hormuz carries tilde 20–25% of the world's seaborne oil and gas supplies, with tilde 1/3 of global fertilizer trade passing through it. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC and Guardian report Australia's E7 wedgetail is deployed to the UAE, but Newscom Australia does not specify the UAE and omits this detail entirely. Guardian states Iran has laid mines in the strait, while ABC and Newscom Australia do not mention mines explicitly. Newscom Australia reports Trump's ceasefire claim was denied by Iran, but this is not corroborated by ABC or Guardian. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Story 38 of 54. U.S. Supreme Court hearing on Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. U.S. Supreme Court hearing on Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments on March 20, 2024, regarding Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants. Donald Trump attended the oral arguments as the first sitting president to do so, sitting in the public gallery. The 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause states, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the U.S." The Trump administration argues the phrase "subject to the jurisdiction thereof" excludes children of undocumented immigrants, relying on the concept of domicile as a permanent residence. The Migration Policy Institute estimated Trump's policy would increase the unauthorized immigrant population by 2.7 million by 2045 and 5.4 million by 2075, based on tilde 255,000 affected births annually. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the executive order would apply to children born after February 19, 2025, while Article 2 does not specify this exact date but implies a future cutoff without precision. Article 1 mentions Trump's executive order was issued on his first day in office in 2017, but Article 2 does not reference the timing of the order's issuance. Article 1 explicitly names the Migration Policy Institute's estimate of 255,000 affected births annually, while Article 2 rounds this to 250,000 without citing the source. This story was covered by The Guardian. Story 39 of 54. Sam Kerr's potential transfer from Chelsea FC to Denver Summit in the NWSL. Sam Kerr's potential transfer from Chelsea FC to Denver Summit in the NWSL. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Sam Kerr is linked to a move from Chelsea FC to the NWSL's Denver Summit Club at the end of the 2023-24 WSL season. Kerr's contract with Chelsea expires at the end of the 2023-24 season. Kerr has scored 110 goals in 153 appearances for Chelsea since joining in 2019. Denver Summit is an expansion NWSL club owned by Michaela Schifrin and Peyton Manning. Kerr posted on Snapchat denying the transfer report with the quote, "Don't believe everything you read in the media, man, they know a decision before me." But not all outlets told the same story. ABC frames Kerr's signing as confirmed via Network 10, while The Guardian uses reportedly to describe the move. ABC states Kerr's goal assist was in a 1-0 WSL win over Arsenal, but The Guardian does not mention this specific detail. The Guardian implies Denver Summit's first match was in late February, early March, while ABC ties it to Kerr's return timeline without a date. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 40 of 54. Philippines faces severe economic crisis due to oil price surge from Middle East conflict. Philippines faces severe economic crisis due to oil price surge from Middle East conflict. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency on March 27, 2024, becoming the first country to do so due to the Iran war. Almost all of the Philippines' oil is imported from the Persian Gulf, making it highly vulnerable to global fuel price surges. Diesel prices in the Philippines rose from 55 Philippine pesos, $1.30 per litre before the war to over 130 pesos, $3.12 per litre in April 2024. Jeepney drivers and tricycle taxi workers are among the hardest hit, with many unable to afford fuel or facing strikes over rising costs. The Philippine government secured alternative oil supplies totaling over 1 million barrels for April 2024 to bolster dwindling stockpiles. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reported diesel prices rising to 130 pesos, $3.12 per litre, while The Guardian did not specify the exact current price but focused on a 60% surge from pre-war levels. ABC emphasized the Philippines' stockpile of 1 million barrels for April, while The Guardian did not mention this specific quantity but noted the government's assurance of supplies until June 30th. ABC highlighted the Philippine Daily Inquirer's framing of the crisis as an existential threat, while The Guardian did not reference this specific quote or newspaper. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 41 of 54. German TV star Collien Fernandes accuses ex-husband Christian Ulmen of AI porn and digital abuse, sparking national debate. German TV star Collien Fernandes accuses ex-husband Christian Ulmen of AI porn and digital abuse, sparking national debate. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Collien Fernandes and Christian Ulmen were a high-profile German celebrity couple married since 2011, with a daughter, who separated in 2023-2024. Fernandes accused Ulmen in Der Spiegel of creating fake social media profiles in her name, distributing sexualized images, videos, and subjecting her to digital violence. Fernandes filed a legal complaint against Ulmen in Spain in 2023 due to stronger legal protections for digital gender-based violence there. Ulmen denies the allegations and has threatened legal action against Der Spiegel for its coverage. Fernandes has been publicly discussing digital violence for years, including a 2024 documentary on non-consensual pornographic content. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Fernandes claims Ulmen confessed to her after her 2024 documentary aired, while Article 2 does not mention this timeline or confession. Article 1 describes Fernandes' allegations as primarily about identity abuse, fake profiles, impersonation, rather than AI deepfakes, whereas Article 2 frames her claims as centered on AI-generated pornographic images. Article 1 notes Ulmen's lawyer denied creating deepfakes but did not specify whether Ulmen admitted to other forms of abuse, while Article 2 focuses solely on Ulmen's denial of all allegations. This story was covered by The Guardian. Story 42 of 54. Former AFL player Nick Stevens convicted of fraud in pool installation scheme. Former AFL player Nick Stevens convicted of fraud in pool installation scheme. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nick Stevens was found guilty on 12 counts of obtaining a financial advantage by deception and one charge of using a false document in the County Court of Victoria on April 2024. Stevens was remanded in custody until his plea hearing on May 21, 2024, after Judge Fiona Todd denied an extension of his bail. Stevens allegedly defrauded 6 families in Mildura, Victoria, out of $170,000 to $171,000 for pools they never received or received illegally. The 6 families were left with either no pools, giant holes in their backyards, or non-compliant pools requiring demolition. Stevens was a former Carlton and Port Adelaide AFL player who played 231 matches between 1998 and 2009 and later coached SNFL club Glenelg. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports Stevens was 45 years old at the time of the trial, while Newskamau states he was 46. ABC does not mention Stevens' emotional reaction to the verdict, whereas Newskamau describes him as showing little reaction with eyes forward. ABC states Stevens was found not guilty on one charge relating to the first victim's financial advantage, but Newskamau specifies this was only for the first part payment, not the full charge. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 43 of 54. Court rejects suppression order on Bondi gunmen's family identities. Court rejects suppression order on Bondi gunmen's family identities. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Naved Akram, 24, is charged with 59 offences including 15 counts of murder and 1 count of committing a terrorist act related to the Bondi Beach shooting on December 14, 2023. Akram's father, Sajid Akram, 50, was shot dead by police at the scene of the attack during a Hanukkah festival at Bondi Beach. A Sydney court, local court Judge Hugh Donnelly, rejected Akram's bid to suppress the identities, addresses, and workplaces of his mother, brother, and sister due to alleged threats and intimidation. Akram's driver's license, containing his Bonnyrigg home address, was posted on social media shortly after the December 14 shooting, making suppression orders ineffective according to the court. The court ruled that Akram's mother had previously participated in an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald, ABC, and The Guardian, placing her name in the public domain. But not all outlets told the same story. News.com.au reports a bottle of yellow liquid suspected to be urine was thrown at the family's yard, but this detail is not mentioned in the ABC or Guardian. The ABC and Guardian state the brief of evidence was due to be served in early March, while News.com.au claims it was due to be served next week immediately after the hearing. The Guardian notes the brief of evidence had yet to be served at the time of the March 17 hearing, but the ABC does not specify this timing explicitly. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and News.com.au. Story 44 of 54. Man accused of bombing Invasion Day rally may plead insanity defense. Man accused of bombing Invasion Day rally may plead insanity defense. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Liam Alexander Hall, 32, is accused of allegedly throwing a homemade explosive device into a crowd at an Invasion Day rally in Perth CBD on January 26, 2026. The device was a glass container filled with liquid, screws, and ball bearings, described as a fragment bomb, and was allegedly encased in an Elsa-themed sock from Frozen Star. Hall is being held at Perth's Franklin Centre for a psychiatric assessment ahead of a Section 27, Insanity, defence under WA Criminal Code. Hall faces charges of engaging in a terrorist act, intent to harm, and possessing explosives under suspicious circumstances. The rally had approximately 2,500 attendees when the alleged incident occurred. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states Hall was charged with terrorism 11 days after the incident, while ABC and Guardian do not mention this specific timeline for the charge. Guardian reports Hall did not appear via video link from the Franklin Centre on Tuesday, but News Kamau and ABC do not mention this absence. ABC describes the rally location as Forest Place, while News Kamau and Guardian refer to the Perth CBD generally without specifying Forest Place. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and News.com.au. Story 45 of 54. Western Australia faces severe mouse plague threatening agriculture and homes. Western Australia faces severe mouse plague threatening agriculture and homes. Here's what every outlet agrees on. CSIRO Research Officer Steve Henry reported mouse numbers exceeding 2,000 to 800 per hectare in Western Australian cropping zones, Midwest, Wheatbelt, Goldfields Esperance, as of 2024, with some paddocks seeing up to 8,000 mice hectare. Farmers in WA are experiencing unprecedented mouse infestations, with reports of mice damaging homes, e.g., chewing through plastic containers, milk cartons, and food supplies. Steve Henry warned that mice are breeding rapidly. Females can produce 6 to 10 offspring every 19 to 21 days, starting at 6 weeks old, leading to exponential population growth. WA Farmers Chief Executive Trevor Whittington stated the plague threatens $1 billion worth of grain crops, wheat, barley, canola, and is worsening due to recent cyclonic rains and warm temperatures. Farmers require federal approval to access high-strength mouse bait, ZP50, which is currently restricted, delaying control efforts. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states farmers are finding tilde 4,000 burrows hectare, while ABC does not mention borough counts but focuses on mice hectare density, 2,000 to 800. News Kamau highlights farmer Belinda Eastuffer's call for emergency payments, which ABC does not reference. ABC's Peter Sekanorskas describes a dozen mice in his pantry, while News Kamau does not provide specific home infestation numbers beyond unprecedented claims. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 46 of 54. Victorian government expands device ban in schools to include smartwatches, headphones, and all school types. Victorian government expands device ban in schools to include smartwatches, headphones, and all school types. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Victorian public and private, including Catholic, schools will ban internet-enabled smartwatches and wireless headphones from Term 1 2027. Mobile phones have been banned in Victorian public schools since 2020, with the policy expanded to all schools starting January 27, 2027. Smartwatches with notifications, internet connection, or recording functions will be restricted during school hours. Education Minister Ben Carroll stated the phone ban led to increased student focus, improved socialization, and fewer device-related incidents. Independent review found students were more focused in class and more social during breaks after the phone ban. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC notes mixed parental views on the ban's effectiveness, while Thege does not mention any parental opposition beyond the general debate. Thege states the policy will start from Term 1 2027, while ABC and News Kamau specify January 27, 2027, no term date mentioned elsewhere. ABC reports Parents Victoria advocating for student-led consultation, but this perspective is not mentioned in Thege or News Kamau. This story was covered by ABC News, news.com.au, and The Age. Story 47 of 54. Jackie Henderson sues ARN Media for $82 million wrongful termination after radio show collapse. Jackie Henderson sues ARN Media for $82 million wrongful termination after radio show collapse. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Jackie Henderson filed a legal action against ARN Media in federal court claiming at least $82,250,000 in compensation for wrongful termination of her 10-year contract for the Kyle and Jackie O show on Kiss 1065 Sydney. ARN Media confirmed Henderson's termination followed her sending a complaint letter to CBC, Commonwealth Broadcasting Corporation Party Limited, alleging psychosocial health and safety issues and bullying by Kyle Sandilands on and prior to February 20, 2026. ARN Media disputes Henderson's claims and will defend the proceedings, stating the termination was linked to her exercise of workplace rights under Section 340 of the Fair Work Act 2009, CTH. ARN Media's announcement on March 3, 2026, included misleading and deceptive statements under the Australian consumer law, according to Henderson's lawsuit. The Kyle and Jackie O show ended abruptly in February 2026 after an on-air row between Henderson and Kyle Sandilands, with Sandilands later also suing ARN Media for wrongful termination of his $100 million contract. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources for verifiable factual claims. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 48 of 54. US fighter jet shot down over Iran, rescue operations and regional escalation in Middle East conflict. US fighter jet shot down over Iran, rescue operations and regional escalation in Middle East conflict. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Iran claimed to have shot down a US F-15 fighter jet over southwestern Iran on Friday, with one crew member rescued and the other still missing, Guardian, ABC. US Special Forces conducted a search and rescue operation in Iran's rugged southwest region to locate the missing pilot, Guardian, ABC. Iranian authorities urged civilians in Kogaluyeh and Boyar Ahmed province to search for the downed jet's crew, Guardian, ABC. Israel launched strikes in Beirut targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, including bridges and military sites, with reports of explosions and civilian casualties, Guardian, ABC. Lebanese Health Ministry reported 1,368 deaths, including 125 children and 91 women, and 4,138 wounded since March 2 due to Israeli strikes, ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian reports Iran claimed to have shot down an F-15, while ABC states Iran's military claimed the downed jet was an F-35, single-seater. The Guardian mentions US media reported the pilot of the downed A-10 was rescued, but ABC does not mention this specific detail about the A-10 rescue. The Guardian states Trump told NBC the F-15 loss would not affect negotiations with Iran, while ABC does not include this direct quote from Trump. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 49 of 54. 13-year-old girl charged in Melbourne anti-Semitic crime spree involving car thefts and assaults. 13-year-old girl charged in Melbourne anti-Semitic crime spree involving car thefts and assaults. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A 13-year-old girl from the Bayside area was charged with 52 offences, including reckless conduct endangering serious injury, multiple thefts, and threatening harm based on a protected attribute, anti-Semitism. The girl allegedly drove a stolen black Hyundai sedan in Hampton, Riponlia, and Caulfield between the 25th of March and the 28th of March, shouting anti-Semitic remarks and throwing eggs at pedestrians. On the 28th of March at 7 p.m., the Hyundai allegedly swerved toward a group of Jewish families crossing Hotham Street and Glen Eira Road in Riponlia, narrowly missing them. A 45-year-old cyclist was hit by a stolen silver SUV in Brighton on the 25th of March, suffering non-life-threatening injuries. The SUV fled the scene. 3 female occupants, including the 13-year-old, of a stolen white Volkswagen Golf allegedly rammed an e-scooter in Elwood just after midnight on the 26th of March, then fled. Police used stop sticks to halt the car. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC described the e-scooter crash victims as not requiring medical attention, but The Age states the cyclist was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, no mention of e-scooter rider's medical status. The Guardian specifies the e-scooter crash occurred in Elwood just after midnight on Tuesday morning, while The Age and ABC do not provide a precise time for this incident. The Age reports the Hyundai was stolen from a gym in Caulfield, but ABC and Guardian do not specify the location of the theft beyond Melbourne's southeast. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and The Age. Story 50 of 54. Western Australia invokes emergency fuel supply powers amid regional shortages. Western Australia invokes emergency fuel supply powers amid regional shortages. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Western Australian government invoked emergency powers under the Fuel, Energy and Power Resources Act 1972 to compel fuel suppliers to disclose supply chain details. Energy Minister Amberjade Sanderson requested information on fuel volumes, distribution points, and frequency of distribution from major suppliers. Only 3 of the 6 major fuel suppliers voluntarily provided supply chain information after the government's initial request. Premier Roger Cook wrote to the 6 major fuel suppliers requesting details on stock levels, supply priorities, and wholesale market volumes. Suppliers facing non-compliance could face penalties of up to $100,000 per day for corporations and $10,000 per day for individuals. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports the government asked wholesalers to stop extreme stockpiling, while Newscomau does not mention this specific action. ABC states the emergency powers are being used to allocate fuel to regional WA, but SBS's headline does not specify this allocation detail. Newscomau claims the emergency powers align with the Commonwealth's Keep Australia Moving plan, while ABC does not reference this alignment. This story was covered by ABC News, news.com.au, and SBS News. Story 51 of 54. Nicole Daedone's prison sentence for running One Taste's orgasmic meditation scheme. Nicole Daedone's prison sentence for running One Taste's orgasmic meditation scheme. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nicole Daedone was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for forced labor conspiracy in March 2024. Daedone was ordered to forfeit $12 million and 7 victims received roughly $890,000 in restitution. One Taste's orgasmic meditation, OM, involved women lying unclothed in a nest while men stroked their clitoris for 15 minutes in a goalless practice. Daedone sold One Taste for $12 million in 2017 before controversies emerged. Rachel Cherwitz, One Taste's former sales director, was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for her role in the scheme. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Daedone was sentenced in this March, while Article 2 specifies the sentencing occurred in March 2024, implied timeline conflict. Article 1 claims Daedone's conviction was in 2017, but Article 2 clarifies her conviction occurred in June 2023, with sentencing in March 2024. Article 1 describes the clitoral nerve mapping as only this week, March 2024, while Article 2 does not reference this detail. This story was covered by The Guardian. Story 52 of 54. Death of Rohingya refugee Nurul Shah Alam abandoned by US border agents ruled homicide. Death of Rohingya refugee Nurul Shah Alam abandoned by US border agents ruled homicide. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nurul Shah Alam, 56, a Rohingya refugee from Myanmar, died on the 24th of February, 2025 in Buffalo, New York, after being left in a Tim Hortons parking lot by US Border Patrol agents on the 19th of February, 2025 at 8:18 p.m. The Erie County Medical Examiner ruled Shah Alam's death a homicide on the 31st of March, 2025, citing complications of a perforated duodenal ulcer precipitated by hypothermia and dehydration as the cause. Shah Alam was visually impaired, unable to speak English, and wore only detention booties when left in sub-freezing temperatures, below freezing in Buffalo. Shah Alam was arrested on the 15th of February, 2025 after entering a residential backyard in Buffalo's Black Rock neighborhood, where he was tasered and charged with felony assault, burglary, and criminal mischief. Shah Alam was released from Erie County custody on the 19th of February, 2025 and transferred to Border Patrol custody before being dropped off at Tim Hortons without notification to his family or attorney. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Shah Alam was dropped off at a closed Tim Hortons, while Article 2 describes it as a closed location but does not explicitly confirm it was Tim Hortons, only Article 1 names Tim Hortons. Article 1 does not mention Shah Alam's family preparing for Ramadan or their emotional state before his disappearance, while Article 2 details this extensively. Article 1 does not reference Shah Alam's plea deal or the specific charges he was reduced to, while Article 2 states he pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and misdemeanor possession of a weapon. This story was covered by The Guardian. Story 53 of 54. Climate change threatens Australia's superb fairy wren with extinction within decades. Climate change threatens Australia's superb fairy wren with extinction within decades. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The superb fairy wren was voted Australia's favourite bird in 2013 and 2021 Guardian BirdLife Australia polls. Researchers predict the superb fairy wren population at Canberra's Australian National Botanic Gardens could go extinct within 30 to 40 years under intermediate and very high carbon emission scenarios, 2059 to 2062. The study found population extinction is likely to happen very fast within 30 to 40 years in intermediate and very high emission scenarios. The superb fairy wren suffered low breeding success during dry springs and reduced adult survival following unusually warm winters and hot summers. Researchers used nearly 30 years of weekly observations to track the bird's survival impacts from climate change. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian states the extinction risk is within 30 to 40 years under intermediate and very high emission scenarios, while ABC specifies 2059 to 2062 for extinction under those scenarios. The Guardian mentions optimistic emission scenarios may still pose a high extinction risk within 50 years, but ABC does not explicitly reference optimistic scenarios in its timeline. The Guardian implies the study's data is extrapolated nationally, while ABC clarifies the findings are based on Canberra's botanic gardens and may not apply uniformly across Australia. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Story 54 of 54. Sydney gym shooting, 3 men charged in daylight shooting incident. Sydney gym shooting, 3 men charged in daylight shooting incident. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A shooting occurred outside a gym on Steer Road, Gregory Hills, Sydney's southwest at 8:30 a.m. on December 5, 2025. 2 masked men fired 12 shots at a 48-year-old man outside the gym. The victim escaped uninjured. The alleged shooters fled in a red Range Rover SUV with cloned number plates, which was found abandoned in bushland near Macquarie Grove Road, Cobbitty. Police recovered clothing, masks, cloned number plates, and 2 pistols near the ditched car. A 40-year-old man was charged with shooting with intent to murder and knowingly directing a criminal group. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the 32-year-old was charged with acquiring a pistol while under a firearms prohibition order as a separate charge, while ABC combines it with other charges. ABC names the alleged target as Stephen Hallaby, a former boxer with gang links, but News Kamau does not mention the target's name or background. News Kamau does not specify the exact timing of the 32-year-old's arrest, only mentions early hours of Monday, while ABC states it was at 6:10 a.m. on Monday. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au.